I rise in support of LB586 and the underlying amendments. I think most of us have received a good number of emails on this particular topic, and I've received over 100 emails. And it's, in fact, the biggest issue based on emails that I've seen this year. A good half of those emails are in opposition to LB586. And the emails go like this, and I'm sure it'll sound familiar to you. Please oppose LB586 regardless of any amendments that may be proposed or made to the bill. No surprise in that. This particular email is a robo email or a cut and paste kind of email that's come from the Catholic Church. And I contend that this position expressed by the Catholic Church doesn't represent all Catholics. It certainly doesn't represent all Christians. It doesn't represent all religions. It certainly doesn't represent all citizens of this country. A good 25% of the citizens don't practice religion in this country, and it certainly doesn't represent the opinion of all people. So we should take this email and their position as it stands. I'm proud that my church has embraced it, and I certainly do too, and I'm proud to once again support LB 586.
Thank you, Senator McAllister and Senator Crawford. Senator McCoy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Would Senator Moorfield yield us some questions, please?
Senator Moorfield, will you yield to Senator McCoy for some questions?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Senator. I have some questions about this underlying amendment. Obviously, it's completely within the prerogative of anyone to add to or take from pieces of legislation at any given point through the process. However, I don't believe that any of us, or at least I wasn't anyway, were afforded the opportunity to go through this until we started debate on this bill earlier this afternoon. But I have had the time to go through AM 1644 fairly thoroughly, and I do have some questions for you. Starting with line 13 on page 1. Can you walk me through how we got to where we got to in this amendment, or you got to, as far as defining what is someone whose duties are ministerial?
Well, Senator, I would have to pull up the court cases, but the court has defined who is ministerial and who is not. And part of that is teaching the faith and preaching the faith. And there's litmus tests and some fact-based tests that the court uses to determine that. What
court case are you referring to, Senator?
Well, I don't have them right offhand, but okay. I can certainly pull them up for you, Senator.
So was this amendment brought to you then? Or if you're not, I guess I'm trying to understand, if you're not familiar with the definitions in here, who would be familiar with that?
The court cases would. So I'm more than happy to bring up the court cases, but I don't have that memorized.
Okay. Well, I'll move on to some other questions then. I'm going to go down starting in line 19. We have a different section of this amendment. And, well, actually, I'm going to skip down to line, starting in line 22, where it says, an employee may express the employee's religious or moral beliefs and commitments in the workplace in a reasonable, non-disruptive, and non-harassing way. What are the definitions of that?
Well, that would be plain meaning. So if you have a dictionary, you'd be able to pull those out. And
I'm sorry, what was that again?
That would be interpreted as plain meaning. So you would be able to pull out a dictionary and look at those definitions.
But, Senator, this is a legislature, and plain meanings oftentimes don't mean one and the same.
Well, actually, Senator, courts, unless there's a definition provided by the legislature, the court looks at the plain meaning.
Well, that is why we have courts, though, Senator, is to oftentimes argue and debate and litigate over the meaning of words.
Yes.
So in this amendment, Senator, what is the meaning of those words? Who provides that interpretation? Who defines what reasonable non-disruptive, and non-harassing. What does that mean? What is the definition for that?
Well, to answer your first question, who would decide that would be the courts. To answer your second question, as I noted earlier, since we don't provide a definition in here, it'd be plain meaning, so they would look at a dictionary.
Well, but your
common usage.
Your interpretation or my interpretation of non-harassing, non-threatening, reasonable, non-disruptive, and non-harassing may be completely different, Senator.
That's why
Correct?
we have courts, Senator.
1 minute.
So is the purpose of this? So are you telling me the purposes of this amendment is to create a situation in which the courts will interpret what this means?
No, but I think that's what you're trying to get at.
That's not at all what I'm trying to get at, Senator. I'm merely asking a simple question that I've asked many times in 7 years in the legislature, and that is, what is the meaning of said language in either a bill or an amendment?
The meaning of it is the intent of the legislature.
Well, perhaps we need to come up with some definitions of these words.
I'd be more than happy to work with you, Senator.
Because I think this is vague, it's ambiguous, and your interpretation of this and mine could be completely different. And thank you, Senator Moorfield. I appreciate the give and take. Members, this just is a scratch, just scratches the surface of what's problematic about this amendment. If anything, this amendment makes this legislation worse than the original bill and committee amendment, in my view. This amendment doesn't help, it makes it worse. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McCoy and Senator Moorfield. Senator Chambers, you recognize this is your third time.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, I'm a stickler for meaning and clarity when we write legislation, but it's foolish for somebody trained in the law to argue with somebody not trained in the law. Then the one not trained in the law is going to try to tell the one trained in the law what the courts are going to say. Courts have said repeatedly they will never construe or interpret language in a legislative enactment if it's clear in what it says. And in determining whether it's clear, unless the legislature says otherwise, words will be taken in their ordinary and popular meaning, and courts themselves have used dictionaries, not Black's Law Dictionary, dictionaries to get what that meaning is. So if Senator McCoy doesn't know what these words are, I wouldn't waste my time. Senator Moorfield did the right thing. Get a dictionary. If you don't know what reasonable is, get a dictionary. And if the dictionary definition isn't good enough, you can find cases where courts have said repeatedly what reasonable means. So Senator McCoy has trouble understanding ordinary English, and maybe he's dealing with what Senator Kentner told us about the other day about these people who are the DACA children who don't understand English, don't speak English well. Well, we see examples of that all the time, but it's good for people on the floor when they don't understand things to ask questions and have their education improved by people who can explain it. Now, I was against that definition of this so-called exemption. It goes into great detail. And that's why I was against it. If they put it in, I wouldn't oppose the bill, because the language even before that told the churches what they want. You want to discriminate? Well, you can discriminate. And they said, well, you got to tell us every kind of way we can discriminate. So you try to accommodate them. Then somebody who thinks he's speaking for the church says, well, that ain't good enough. I don't understand it.
Senator Moorfield, 220.
Thank you, Senator Bowles, and thank you, Mr. President. Just to follow up on Senator McCoy's question on what the case is, it's actually Hosanna Tabor Lutheran Church and School versus Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It was decided just a year or two ago, and there's a good recap actually on SCOTUS blog, and it provides a lot of those definitions that Senator McCoy was curious about. I'd like to also note that in terms of where the language from the amendment came from, it actually came from Utah. It was an amendment that was provided by religious interests in Utah to be able to protect religious freedom there and the religious rights of the citizens of Utah. And so this is language, actually, that has been tried and true, passed in another state, in a state that I think politically is probably very similar to Nebraska in that sense. And so I think that when we're talking about definitions and case law, the case law on this has been on the books in some cases for 60 years. Because I'd like to point out once again that there has been a religious exemption to Fair Labor Employment Acts in the various states and on the federal level for the last 60 years. Thank you, Mr. President. Also, I'd like to point out that we're not creating a special class here. We're simply bringing business standard, our state laws, back up to modern day business standards. Business standards that, as many of my colleagues have talked before me, are commonplace and expected in states that attract global companies, national companies, and startup companies. And if you look at the list of businesses that we've sent out today that are in support of this, not just any businesses, but Nebraska businesses from across the state, not just Lincoln and Omaha, that are in support of this and talk about their number one problem right now is recruitment. And granted, that's a good problem to have, but we're missing out on talent and the ability to attract that talent to be able to be competitive in the marketplace and reach our full potential on the state level. We talk about tax relief. Well, I tell you what, broadening the tax base is one of the easiest ways to provide tax relief in many ways. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morfield. McCoy, 230.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Rush. It's interesting that Senator Morfield would bring up the Hosanna-Tabor United States Supreme Court decision because I was about to bring it up. And for the benefit of the members, you could look this up on your own. The Hosanna Supreme Court case was very clear in this area. That's why I believe this amendment is unconstitutional and why this bill would be unconstitutional if this amendment advanced. In that case, all nine, it was an unanimous decision, all 9 justices came down on one side on this issue, and that was, and I'll quote from Chief Justice John Roberts, who wrote the ruling and the decision in this. And quote, "The Establishment Clause prevents the government from appointing ministers, and the Free Exercise Clause prevents it from interfering with the freedom of religious groups to select their own." Unquote. Well, members, that's what AM 1644 does. It handcuffs religious organizations into an strict interpretation of what is and who is and who is not a minister. It's unconstitutional. And I would remind Senator Chambers, by the way, not all of us in this body are attorneys, and that's probably a good thing, because I bet if you went and looked, the low popularity and low approval ratings of politicians would only be surpassed by those of attorneys. So, Senator Chambers, I'm not an attorney.
1 minute.
But in the eyes of the law, all of us in this body are equal, whether we are attorneys or not. And I don't have to be an attorney to look up a Supreme Court case and tell you that it very clearly defines what is allowed and what is not, and that is the highest court in the land, I might add, as we all know, and they spoke very clearly on this issue. That's why I think this amendment makes this bill worse. It was right to have been voted down, and I am not in favor of the amendment or the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McCoy.
I appreciate Senator Beau McCoy blowing up the Hosanna-Tabor case, and as I believe Senator Morfield did too. I am confused by his conclusion in the case, although I must have to admit my own unfamiliarity with it. From the quote he read, which I've found again on the Wikipedia page, so thank you for reading off the Wikipedia page. The Establishment Clause prevents the government from appointing ministers, and the Free Exercise Clause prevents it from interfering with the freedom of religious groups to select their own. I believe that's the intent of 1644. The intent of 1644 is to say, provide a religious exemption, to provide a strong one, to provide one that I as a cosigner was accused of not wanting and not needing and not having. The goal is, if someone is in a ministerial position, to allow the church the freedom that the Supreme Court has decided that they already have. So and I can look into this more, and I'm sure we can have more people weigh in. But I frankly just have to disagree with Senator McCoy's interpretation based on that quick little snippet. I absolutely do not think it is a slam dunk case of this entire statute, this entire idea being unconstitutional.
As far as Senator McCoy taking one sentence that came from a case that did not involve what we're talking about and try to apply it to this and say the court would rule this unconstitutional, shows what happens when you have a non-lawyer or a dumb lawyer trying to interpret a Supreme Court case. That's why you read the case. First thing you learn in law school, read the case. Don't read one of these little, what do they call them, cliff notes on a case. He doesn't know how to read a case. He admitted he's not a lawyer, and he proved it. You will never see a court take one sentence out of a case. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Kittner, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. President. A couple things. I guess the first thing, we were talking about the Chamber of Commerce supports it. You know, as the small businesses I talk to, you know, unlike the Chamber of Commerce, these small businesses all have to make money. There's plenty of nonprofits and stuff in the Chamber of Commerce. They don't like protected classes. Protected classes open them up to lawsuits. Makes it tough to fire people. They just don't like it. You know, more often than not, I'm with the Chamber of Commerce on issues, but you know, when it push comes to shove, I represent the people of Legislative District 2 and the people of the state, not any business organizations or any other organizations at all. Work with them when I can, and we disagree. We agree to disagree. So I think that as I talk to people, this isn't their top 15 or so issues. There's an awful lot of things they're concerned about. This doesn't make the top 15 or so. One thing I want to say, we talked about you know, homosexuals or gays. I think would be a bit better, more accurate way to state it as being needing protection and how tough their life is, and they were born with this, and boy, you know, it's just the way it is. Well, let me tell you the way it is. If I've got a group article here from CNN Money. It says lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people are better at managing their money than the average American. They've reported significantly higher annual incomes, $61,500 compared to the national median of $50,000. But they also they have $4,000 less in debt than the average American, $6,000 more in savings, and they were slightly more likely to have jobs in the first place. And unemployment rate, and this is a year or two ago, was 7% when the national rate was 7.9%. We're now a little bit over 5%. The combination of factors that play, they're all kind of combination of factors, but they're generally well educated, with more than half of the gay people they surveyed having a bachelor's degree, and they tend to live in the higher income areas. It flows down from there. I'm reading the article. You have a higher level of education, access to higher paying jobs, in areas where there's good salaries, more disposable income. Does it sound like we're describing somebody that needs a lot of help? It doesn't strike me as that we're describing people that are in great need, that if we don't pass this bill, I don't know what, they're going to make less money? They're making more money than the average person anyway. And I'm looking at addition U.S. News and World Report. Women who are in same-sex couple relationships and in the labor force tend to make far more money than similar money women in heterosexual couples. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So I'm just not buying that, geez, these poor downtrodden people, they just need this government intervention. They need this law just to tweak their life and just make it a little bit better. I'll tell you what, if they're making all this money, they're not having trouble getting jobs. And if they're at this level of income and this level of money, they're very talented. They're very in demand. I don't see anything in any of the statistics that would suggest that we need to pass any special legislation or create any special classes for people to make more money than the average person, or better educated than the average person, have more disposable income, more savings, and less debt than the average person. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kidner.
And then I wanted to address Senator Kidner's remarks. Senator Kidner's remarks was basically, he had, for anybody who doesn't remember, for those who missed it, was that our LGBT population tends to have a higher income, tends to have a higher education level, and several other positive things about them where they appeared to be exceeding the national average. So therefore it was impossible for them to be discriminated against, is I think the intent, or at very minimum any discrimination has to be minor and inconsequential. Well, I would challenge, Senator Kidner. I don't see him at the moment, but oh, look at 102 head. Senator Kidner, will you yield to a question?
Senator Kidner, will you yield?
I certainly will.
Senator Kidner, would you feel that it was appropriate for people to be fired for their Christian faith?
To be what?
Fired because of their Christian faith?
No.
I agree. If I told you that Christians were among a higher earning religious denomination, would that change your opinion on that?
No.
All right. Thank you, Senator Kidner.
First of all, I challenge Senator Kidner's statistics. A lot of people who are gay or lesbian will not acknowledge it. He doesn't know who is gay and who is not, and whoever wrote that claptrap that he read knows no more than he knows. But every time he brings statistics, it's to demean, degrade, and justify discriminating against somebody else. So that should be dismissed.
Mr. President, I yield my time to Senator Moorfield.
Senator Moorfield, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Crawford, for yielding your time. I know that I'm probably going to be the last person speaking tonight, as at 6 o'clock we're transitioning over to the next round of debate on different bills on speaker priorities. I do want to tell everybody that I appreciate the robust debate, the good questions, and the discussion tonight. And I also am aware that we're at a point where we need to go back to the drawing board a little bit, sit down with some individuals, and decide what steps to take next. And that we're willing to work with both the opponents and some of the proponents that may have concerns with the bill, but are in support of the overall overarching concept of ensuring that we have equality for all Nebraskans. But we respect people's religious beliefs as well. And there's just a few things that I would like to point out based on the debate before we end here. First, this is not about religion. It's about adding two phrases, sexual orientation and gender identity, to our state's employment non-discrimination laws. And as we noted time after time, the state's business leaders are in support of this. From all over the state, not just Omaha and Lincoln, and it's been said several times, the Omaha and Lincoln Chamber are on board with this, not only in name, but their business leaders, their boards, their businesses that they represent have come out strongly because they understand the value of this. And I hope that as we end debate tonight, and as we end the session, that we take a long, hard look at ourselves and how we want, not only for us to vote and be able to go to sleep at night, but then also, how do we want the perception of the state of Nebraska to be? I've had far too many friends, good friends, leave this state who are incredibly successful elsewhere now because we lack fundamental protections to protect not just anybody, not just an anonymous person, but our sons and our daughters, our granddaughters and our grandsons. And I want to be clear about the opposition to this bill. A lot of the sites that we've had today have been surface level news article, debunked research, and outdated case law, or quite frankly, a complete misreading of the case law. The religious exemption that we brought today, that Senator McCoy cited, was actually crafted out of that case. It was crafted in response to that case to provide very specific definitions, and so that it was not vague, which was the problem in Hosanna Tabor. So, I would like to note that the reason why we have some of these different cases in this litigation is because there's an actual problem. And before I end, I just want to restate the different headlines that have exemplified this problem over the last year. Omaha World Herald survey of LGBT Nebraskans finds disturbingly high levels of discrimination. Omaha World Herald, Omaha Library's director's new job, a great opportunity, but he says Nebraska gay rights stance also a factor in his leaving. Nebraska must not resemble another Arkansas or Indiana.
1 minute.
Discrimination happens. And even those of you opposing this bill have admitted it. And so in a way, by refusing to advance this bill, many of us have said to Nebraska and the world in our state that we don't think gay people and transgender people are worthy of protection for discrimination. And there are too many people that have told me, I don't believe in discrimination. I want to protect people from discrimination. But I don't want to make sure that they have protection under the law. Actions speak louder than words, colleagues. And we need to take action on this. And that's why Senator Pansing Brooks and I have decided to request the Speaker not schedule this bill for the agenda again this year. And we'll be back next year. Thank you, Mr. President.